kickstarting development programs. There's been a lot of new resources that have come on the line for professional development officers, and we'd like to talk about ways that we think we can bring these into active practice for our business. So we'd like to walk through, over the course of the next hour together, we'd like to talk about the general landscape for higher education fundraising at the present time, the issues that have consumed so much of our time and activity. We'd like to talk a bit about the stream of history and what's happened over the course of the last 50, the last 25, the last 10 years in driving fundraising and driving the challenges that each of us as professionals face. And we'll outline what we believe to be the requirements for success for a new approach that can bring a shortened period to maturity for engaging major gift prospects. And we're obviously suggesting there is tremendous potential in actually looking at the top of the pyramid and beginning with major gifts. Michael, my colleague, will talk at great extent about this as well. The ingredients and the results that we think that we might achieve are really where we want to go and where we want to engage each of you in our conversations today, because we believe that the fundamental agreements are available for us and that the results can be very impressive. So let's talk about a new paradigm, and let's look at the landscape that has been consuming us in higher education fundraising during the last decade in particular. We don't need to remind you all that there have been powerful limitations and challenges that we have all been dealing with, whether we are from public or private institutions, especially in the area. For many of us who I know are on the phone here today are from public institutions. The reduced state appropriations for higher education have been absolutely overwhelming. One of the last reports that I saw in Chronicle of Philanthropy about 6 months ago reported that there were over 45 states, 45 of the 50 states, during the previous 5 years had experienced significant reductions in appropriations from those states to the higher education institutions in those states. One of the universities that I've worked closely with is in the state of Washington, and that institution in a 2-year period experienced a 50% reduction in their appropriations for higher education. And some of these are beginning to come back a bit, but I live and work in the state of Michigan, and I can tell you that the appropriations are still very, very, very flat, and it's a huge political battle here. We've also seen at the same time some very significant limits and reductions on federal programs. Federal programs in higher education have tended to be in the areas of research and in student financial aid, and both of those areas have seen very strong limits and reductions from our friends in Washington. At the same time, the initial reaction from many of our organizations has been to nudge up tuition in order to offset the reductions in state appropriations and federal support. And we're beginning to sense very strong pushbacks from parents, from legislators, from students as to what is possible in those areas. And in fact, some institutions, some states have seen legislative action that have flat out prevented public universities from increasing their tuition levels. In the private institutions, discounting has been one of the primary areas of responding to that by actually reducing the amount of tuition that the student pays and offsetting that with other resources from the institution. That has been growing, and institutions are now finding huge limits in terms of how far they believe they can continue to discount tuition levels. So there we've seen significant constraints coming on the resources available to higher education to continue to be the robust, strong institutions that we want. But during this same period of these institutions, of these limitations, we've begun to see significant growth in philanthropy. And then we've seen the philanthropy history stream show extreme and very, very impressive increases in gift revenue from private giving and gift revenue and growth in the endowment bases that are generated from this for higher education. Now, while the traditional sources of revenue for all of us, tuition and government support, while those have shown limitations, two things have happened here. Gift revenue has grown quite a bit, but we've also seen great pressure from boards and from government agencies turning to us and saying, well, can't you increase private giving? Private giving can pick up this gap. And we've also seen some very impressive growth in the endowment bases and therefore endowment payouts. So this now is a critical element of higher education funding. It's now something that we're beginning to look at as a primary source, and the attention is turning to all of us as professionals as to how we can make up the difference. Now, the institutions that we think of being philanthropically mature in our private colleagues, the Ivy League institutions and many of the major private institutions, they really began their fundraising programs back in the 1950s and 1960s. I know that one of Harvard's first organized capital campaigns at and above $100 million was in the early 50s, and they began to set some of the patterns for organized fundraising. In the public institutions, it was really in the mid to late 60s and 70s that some of the the Big Ten, the Pac-10, the major national public institutions began to build their strong programs of fundraising. And we began to build the mindset in doing this that it took 10 to 15 to 20 years of program maturation for us to get to the point of being able to truly develop major gift programs. And we developed much of the mindset that we had to begin with annual giving programs, and in fact, in those early years, annual giving programs and quite often athletics led the way in developing these. But we started with the mindset of starting at the bottom of the pyramid, building strong annual giving programs, moving people into special gift level activities, and then after 5 or 10 years, moving to discussions about potential major gifts. We have seen, though, as we've analyzed the results of giving to many campaigns, that many leading donors at the top made their first gift of $1 million and above to capital campaigns, that their very first significant gift to the institution was at $1 million and above. So that has led us to begin looking carefully and hard at how can we engage individuals with that capacity and with that potential. So we're here today, as we've said initially, to propose a new paradigm that can kickstart and jumpstart giving at a significantly higher level. Michael will discuss this in a moment, but let me just highlight what we think are the requirements for success for moving to a significantly increased level of engagement early on of those individuals with a significant potential for giving, but not a long history of giving. There's a dramatic change that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years. We have enormously more resources than we ever had before. When I began working in this field, I worked with my prospect group out of pink cards in a shoebox. Now we have the most powerful, we call it big data, analytic resources that are very, very impressive. When we have these on board, we believe that if we can come to the table with an eager and committed and energetic president, with a supportive board, with strong volunteer partners, and with obviously some basic professional expertise and experience on the team. Those of us who on the phone today are professionals. When we have these on hand, and then we are able to make a significant investment in core focused staff and the budget for them to work, with a strategy and a plan for how we're going to identify and engage the best prospects in a discussion about the case and the future and the vision of the institution, then we believe that it is possible to jumpstart over a 6, 12, 18, 24-month period at the most, investing the time for implementation of those resources into this program. We believe there is a terrific potential for increasing and for engaging individuals with great potential as partners in achieving the vision and the potential of the institution. With that, Michael will pick up on the strategies that we've found, the ideas that we've seen, and the approaches that we would like to propose to each of you today for consideration in jump-starting your major gift programs. Michael.
Thank you, Roy. In this interlude slide here, this is a depiction of the robot that solved the Rubik's Cube in 3.253 seconds. You can see the Rubik's Cube there right on top. I don't have any idea how this robot manipulated his or her arms, but I use this to say that we asked this obviously brilliant robot how to raise the most money in the shortest period of time. And with that, also, we remember the definition of insanity. We know that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That was actually coined by no other than Albert Einstein. So we have some very brilliant and wise teachers here, human and otherwise, to inspire our presentation and conversation. Many might disagree with me, but if I were to start a philanthropy program from scratch, I would begin at the peak of the pyramid and tend to the bottom, the base of the pyramid, last rather than first. I would hire 5 major gift officers and a secretary. I would screen and rank my constituency by wealth and attachment, and I would repeat incessantly the stories of my university's mission and vision. I would not start with an annual fund, and there would be no sponsored golf outings. So my question is, why has best practice encouraged institutions to do the opposite, building from the bottom of the pyramid instead of from the top? I think there's a very simple answer to this, and as Roy articulated the history of development programs at private and public universities, I believe that this is a holdover from a time when there was little data. And the data had to be created, and it took time to build the data and to build the prospects one by one. And in this age of available, and I will say inexpensive data, it may not seem that way to all of you as you try to play with your budgets, but relatively speaking, the data is inexpensive and the shortcut to fishing in the right pond for big fish should prove irresistible. Mass engagement, when I talk about avoiding less personal, lower yielding mass engagement activities as mainstays, mass engagements are less personal, and there's safety in numbers, and it's been easier through the years to have donors self-identify, maybe out of necessity, but that's no longer necessary. Personal one-on-one engagement isn't easy, but it's a shorter route to higher revenues if it's adopted strategically. So in this era, it is entirely possible for a computer to rank any institution's constituency in probable order of wealth, name by name, and to determine their philanthropic inclination. Even bad data now can be overcome, and if databases don't already exist, they can be created. So this can all be accomplished in 90 days or less at a cost of approximately $25,000. It's also possible to determine a university's in total philanthropic capacity and to make strategic decisions regarding it. In the history of campaigns and as we have analyzed how philanthropic sums are put together, we know that 500 sources are often responsible for 80% of a university's philanthropy over any 10-year period. 500 sources over 80% over a 10-year period. 50 sources supply 45%, and 10 sources supply 25%. So we don't necessarily have to engage the masses. At a 5-to-1 prospect to donor ratio, we could decide to attempt to engage 50 people, 200 people, or 2,500 people to get those kinds of ratios down to the 500 sources. Less is more, and we can figure out who those best 2,500 people are now with relative certainty. Again, we often think of it in big number terms, and over the years we have done the 20%, the last 20%, we've done that first. So there's safety in numbers, but not maximum revenue. So this assembly of data leads to analysis, it leads to discussion, and the formulation of a plan and several strategies. This may require another 30 days to determine. So 90 days to get the data, 90 days to figure out what to do with the data. These patterns could reveal the need for one professional if you were only to do the 25%. For two professionals if you decided to go after the 45%, or 10 people or more if you decided to go after the 2,500. You just have to decide how much of this capacity you want to bite off. And again, you can let the data drive the decision on investment and on people and on resources. So you're off to the races in 6 months or less, and one is given another 6 months to begin to learn how to engage people personally, again on a one-on-one basis, avoiding that sort of anonymous mass treatment of the constituency. Interestingly, as a sidebar, most universities with existing philanthropy programs work the top of the pyramid and the base of the pyramid. And yet there are vast philanthropic resources in the middle, on the order of 1/3 of total philanthropic potential. Again, it may be a missed opportunity, a missed allocation of resources, or old strategy to ignore those capable of gifts between $5,000 to $25,000. But again, we can figure out who they are and where they live. So there is, I would say, again, deciding to work the pyramid, definitely working the top first, choosing perhaps even to work in the middle, and as I said before, possibly saving the base for last. So having talked with many practitioners at the top philanthropy programs in the country, I asked all of them what was the greatest importance, what was the greatest element for potential success. And I interviewed 25 people, and these would be at the name brand institutions you would know, and 24 out of 25 named the first characteristic as a president or leader that considered philanthropy noble and as a revenue resource of utmost importance. While not all presidents are great fundraisers, they need to empower the rest of the organization and to imbue it throughout the organization. This is the definition of a culture of philanthropy. So that presidential leadership and the presidential endorsement that this is good work and important work is crucial. Second, when I asked the question, what was of second importance, the most important characteristic is the pride in accurate and active representation of mission and vision. And that's what the case for support is all about. It's striking to me how often institutions stray from these basics. Some even go at great lengths to create artificial cases, and even cases that compete with each other in the present moment. The case for unrestricted giving is one of these. The case for unrestricted giving says, give to us because we know better what to do with your money than you do. And that's a over-the-top description, but wouldn't it be better in this age of strategic planning to take that 5-year strategic plan that all of us are driven, that drives all of us, and use that plan as the underpinnings for all philanthropy? This is the agreed upon direction of the university over the next 5 years, and the fundraising elements should very definitely mirror those. So I want to tell a story about training and about the institution. Notre Dame University has the highest productivity of gift officers in the country. And unlike some records, which are a tenth of a second or relatively small next to second place, Notre Dame raises $1 million per gift officer a year more than the second place institution. And of course, you would want to know why, and I asked why, and here's what they told me. They hire salespeople and train them as representatives of the core and the mission of the university. So it wasn't, their driving force was getting people who know how to engage others in a conversation about a negotiation and an outcome. And it's pretty much observed in the world of business that about 1 in 10 people have the capacity to sell actively without the fear of failure. So that proverbial person who can dial the phone book. It's about 1 in 10. And these are the characteristics of successful gift officers as well. And training is about the mission and about the work of the university, and not necessarily about how to ask. That should be actually part of the DNA of the gift officer force. Another example to emphasize this, at Dartmouth, training is accomplished by touring the colleges and departments on a revolving basis. So every 6 weeks, it's mandatory attendance that gift officers would all gather for 2 days, and they would go to, let's say, the cancer center, and there would be a 2-day briefing as to what occurs there. And on a 3-year basis, the gift staff will have been then introduced to every department and every element of the university so that they can have conversations about what people do care about and what the university does the best and what is at stake here in terms of the philanthropic support. So I have, in my own sort of characteristic way, slammed some of the best practices and put forward a new paradigm. And the new paradigm is based on the ready availability of data. And here I want to say this isn't easy, and I recognize that. It takes courage to change course. It takes guts to put resources on the line. But I can cite already, as Roy and I, in our combined work, Roy and I have an interest in this particular reversal of the manner in which resources are allocated in institutions. I can cite 3 institutions over the last 18 months that have changed course and experienced dramatically improved results in a year or less. And all of them were led by an interested and active president, and all were willing to redirect resources and investment and to put more resources on the line. I'll also say that not everyone in the organization, when these changes were put in place, not everyone adapted, but down the road, everything improved. You know, truth be told, the very best institutions have already adopted this strategy, not necessarily, though, on an all-or-nothing basis. Stanford, for instance, major gift officers at Stanford are recognized as rock stars, and that's because they bring in the money. And at Stanford also, the gift officers have learned how to make a prospect into a donor in 8 months or less. So there's a learning curve here. I'm not advocating an all-or-nothing approach either, though interestingly, I think the institutions with the least resources have more at stake to practice this new data-driven program. And it may seem, because of the apparent cost and because of the what is perhaps already being produced, the least the institutions with the least resources may be least likely to adopt this approach, and they probably have to be the kinds of institutions that are most likely to adopt this approach. If I were if I were in a leading role at a university now, and I was either starting or redirecting a program, I would hire 10 major gift officers for every 1 other kind of employee in the organization. That's how important I think it is to work things in the manner in this manner, especially since the data is available and the data can be put to use, and the larger gifts driving larger revenues rather than anonymous activities producing smaller gifts at a very infrequent rate. So Roy and I thank you for your attention thus far. But as I said before, both of us have a professional interest in enabling these kinds of turnarounds. So we'd ask you to please call on us if you'd like to continue this conversation. We're now wondering what you think and what questions or how you might agree or how you might disagree as to the elements of this presentation.
Well, there are a couple of questions, Michael, that have come up. One is Anthony Sinera has asked the numbers again that talked about how many donors have responsible for 80% of the gifts. You gave some statistics there. Would you mind repeating those?
Sure. And this is This is a study that it's been reproduced several times and with much the same results, either over a capital campaign, which are usually 7 or 8 years in duration, or over any 10 years of development activity. 500 sources supply 80% of what's raised. 50 sources supply, of that 80%, then 50 sources supply 45%, and 10 sources supply 25%. Now, I use a ratio of needing 5 prospects for each gift. So again, 5 times 500 would be 2,500 sources can be then identified to, in essence, as the target group for almost all the philanthropy of an institution over a 10-year period. It's startling, and we think of it in the big numbers, and we get stymied by the big numbers. And the good news is now that the data, the screening data and the affinity data that's available can identify those 2,500 people with precision.
The second question was, when you think about those big gifts that start without the traditional pipeline, if you had to consider what percentage of those big gifts were able to move forward in this accelerated way as opposed to a traditional long-term cultivation process?
Roy, why don't you take a first crack at it, and I'll follow up.
Well, we have historically said that it took somewhere around 18 months from the time that we began a conversation. We started the dialogue with the donor from that time until they were prepared to make a decision. Obviously, some of these took 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But I believe that a lot of that was because in the very early stages of the dialogue, we weren't necessarily focusing about, we weren't necessarily even aware and clear with what the individual's potential for making a gift was, and we weren't necessarily moving it towards a dialogue about how their gift at, let's say, $500,000 or $1 million could make a significant impact in the life of the institution and meeting the goals and visions of the institution. And this discussion wasn't necessarily taking place by a really excited dean or a compelling president. Therefore, I believe that if we are able to move into a committed dialogue, that it is very possible for a decision on a gift to take place somewhere in the neighborhood of 6, 12, 18 months. Now, have we seen that happen? Yes, it has. I believe it hasn't happened enough because we haven't focused on this jumpstart approach.
There's another interesting piece of history that really supports this, and Roy mentioned it in his opening remarks, and that's that capital campaigns, as institutions were becoming more mature and they stage a campaign, the campaigns would attract $1 million gifts as first-time gifts. There's lots of studies of $1 million gifts, and one of the fascinating things, and this happened at University of Pennsylvania, the Ivy League version. There's perhaps not very many institutions that are more mature than Penn. And Penn received 1/3 of its $1 million gifts in its last campaign from people who had never given Penn a gift before. So even in the regular practice here, you see that the big gifts are the drivers, and it doesn't have to be a 15-year period of continually increased giving and engagement in order to secure $1 million gift. Now, many gifts occur that way, but it would be interesting to see if, you know, having this happen on the merits of the campaign, on the merits of the mission, as Roy said, on the merits of the message of the president and the dean, how people best respond.
Frank Hoffman asked the question, could you talk a little bit about some of the successful tactics in a non-campaign environment that major gift officers may use to approach the top prospects?
Let me take a crack at that first, Michael. To some extent, what we're finding is that we're learning a lot from the experience of public and private institutions moving into 3- and 5-year campaigns during the last 1 or 2 decades. And I think what Michael and I are talking about here today is the experience that we pulled out from the more focused, intense, objective-oriented conversations that take place in a campaign. But they're not. We don't have to be in a campaign in order to talk about a vision, a goal, a case, a purpose, and the way in which a donor can make an impact. That, I believe, is where the most important element of what we're presenting to you today is going to be delivered. And that is there a reason? Is there a purpose? Will it make a difference? There's a great early colleague of mine in my early years from another consulting firm that I respect a lot. We used to use the phrase that we have to persuade and we have to convey to the donor how their gift will improve the human condition. I think that's still in fact, that's still a significant impact. So it's not so much whether it's in a campaign or not, it's whether or not it's a cohesive, focused conversation about the way in which this gift from this donor to this institution will make a difference.
Well said, Roy.
One of the things, Michael, that you said is that the issue around data and is a challenge, particularly for less mature organizations, institutions. Any counsel about how an institution might leapfrog over some of those challenges?
Well, certainly it's the less mature institutions may not, the database may not be as good. Perhaps the database in some cases does hardly exists at all, and those are difficult issues. Even in those cases now, the data suppliers, and you know we know of 3 or 4 certainly in the that routinely serve higher education. The state of big data right now, for instance, could possibly in a regional community, you know, for a regional university, could put together a database for them. If it were a community college that had significant economic importance for the area, every home in America now, every home in America has a philanthropic rating. Every household, so that the fact of the inclination and the fact that someone is a giver or isn't a giver resides in the big computers these days. So that at the very biggest level, it's entirely possible to coax out who are the 50% of the people who give, and who are the 50% of the people who don't, and that you would be placing your emphasis on the people who give. And where there's a little more data in the institution's database, there are now proprietary programs where using 12 or 14 or so indices, the computer can run that database and divide the database into those with the greatest affinity and those with moderate affinity and those with no affinity. And the no affinity people are usually populated by non-donors. And so the computer can make that cut so that you could then have a ranking of those who are closest to you, and you can sort those from their screening in terms of how much they could give. So the combination of the matrix of giving capacity and affinity could define your prospect group right out front.
Another question is, how are programs shortening the 18-month timeline down to Stanford's 8 months?
Richard, could you please repeat that?
Questioner asked, how are programs shortening the 18-month timeline down to Stanford's 8-month timeline from sort of discovery to gift commitment?
Gotcha. Thank you. I guess my smart aleck response is practice, 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 and I think that is part of it. But it is. I think it is also being serious about the nature of the conversation. That the importance of that person's philanthropy to your institution is at the highest level, and that this isn't that this is a negotiation just as perhaps as we would compare it to a sales negotiation, but the issue is philanthropy, and as Roy said earlier, the issue is making a better university and impacting the human activity. So that's serious conversation rather than having to think about this as sort of as cultivation or of some kind of, sure, we want to get to know them, but I do think that this is about getting down to the essentials faster and knowing how to get down to the serious nature of the conversation. This isn't about how to ask. This is about the sheer importance of any one of your institutions being in business and why they're in business and what they do the best.
Yeah, I would absolutely reinforce that. I think a lot of the times our institutions in the past we've been very hesitant to really begin in taking the dialogue to a gift dialogue. We felt that we had to establish, take a year or more to establish the relationship. And that still may be the case in some cases. And we obviously need to learn from experience. We need to be professional. We need to be appropriate. But there's nothing wrong with having a conversation about the way in which an individual who has the capacity and the potential and the record of being philanthropic, there's nothing wrong with moving fairly quickly into the relationship with talking about their philanthropy with our institution. I think if we do that, in some cases, in the appropriate cases, if we do that more sooner in the relationship, in the dialogue, I think that can perhaps move it up.
I agree 100%.
One last question. Can Michael, you or Roy, give any additional thoughts about the middle of the pyramid? What are the best programs doing to address that $5,000 to $25,000 level?
Well, it's an interesting point, and they're sort of the stepchildren of philanthropy programs, so it seems to me. And it's a resource allocation issue. So many enlightened institutions know you have to work the top, and most have decided to continue to work the bottom. It's become difficult to recognize that the staffing of that kind of program is at about the same level and the same expense as at the $1 million level. But I would venture to say that if one were to start just looking at return on investment and placing and considering what those gifts could amount to in practice, I think there would be more people taking resources in that direction. Now, a lot of annual funds are moving there, and you see now with many annual funds have are fully mature. They can't really get more participation. They've reached their limits, and they will then, on a personal basis, move resources to those kinds of gift levels. And interestingly, what's happened is, and this has been very good, those tend not to be unrestricted gifts. Those tend to be gifts that apply to very, very important issues such as annual scholarships and even the annual support of professorships and chairs, so that they, in effect, mirror and mimic the resources that come from endowment. So Harvard is just as likely to steward a $50,000 annual gift in support of scholarship the same way as it would steward a $1 million endowment gift that throws off $50,000. So especially since the recession, that's been a place where there's been a lot more activity, and it's some of what encourages us to believe that we should be making these recommendations and these reallocation of resources in that direction. Thanks.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time. On behalf of Michael Sinkus and Roy Muir, I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. You will receive follow-up from us, and with that, we'll have Michael and Roy's direct contact information. If you have additional questions, we hope you won't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, thank you for participating, and good afternoon.